Welcome to a special episode in conjunction with Sameul, the Swansea University Alumni magazine. The theme of the 2024 issue is culture, celebrating the wide array of talent which has passed through the university's doors over the years. So join me, Jon Doyle, as I chat to some of those who've gone on to find success, find out what their path to publication looked like, and the role Swansea played in shaping the journey of their careers. Today I'm speaking to Sameul Peralta, a man I think it's fair to say of many talents. Sameul is a physicist, a technology executive, a writer, an editor, a movie producer, a curator of art. His poetry has won acclaim in his home country of the Philippines, as well as the UK and beyond. And his anthology series, Future Chronicles, has published some of the finest sci-fi and speculative fiction authors working today. Oh, and did I mention he's on a mission to send art to the moon? But more on that later, because Swansea University played an important part in Sameul's story. Back in the 90s, he travelled to Wales to study for a PhD in physics, a period of his life which proved formative in cultivating his lifelong interest in both science and art. I opened our conversation by asking Sameul what led him towards physics as a subject, and how Swansea became the place where he would study it.
Well, I've always loved science and physics, and I mean it was always something that I wanted to do from a young boy. One of my big memories was essentially doing physics experiments in the labs in high school and in university, and just enjoying them. I wasn't very much good at the theoretical physics parts. I got middling to average grades on them. But then in the lab parts, I excelled, and I thought, well, gosh, maybe I'll be able to make a contribution on the lab side of things. This is where I can know Einstein, but maybe I can be someone else, right? And I came to Swansea under a British Council scholarship. There were several opportunities, but the British Council one was the best opportunity there was. There was the chance to go to Britain was very exciting to me, and as it turned out, Swansea was just a wonderful place. It just forms one of my most fond memories of my life. It's the physics building is this tall tower, and my lab was on, if I remember right, the 9th or 10th floors. It was up there anyways, and it had a vista of the Gower Peninsula and Swansea Bay, and it was just beautiful. It's probably the best office I've ever had in all my life, and ever since then, my offices have gotten smaller and smaller and smaller. And the higher up you go up the ladder, unless you become CEO or something like that, your cubicles get smaller and smaller. So Swansea is not just a great memory for all the science that I did there, but also because of the place. Swansea is a memory, if you like, and the people there were just amazing. So physics, it was natural for me to go into, because that was my great love, and experimental physics. And I have great memories of Professor Gray Morgan, who was the head of my unit at the time. Dr. Alan Williams was my direct mentor there, and so many other people who I still keep in contact with today among the students.
So I was going to say, oh, you made a really big jump from, doing the science. I know your career went in the science direction, and then you sort of went into art stuff as well. But the way you talk about experimental physics and finding kind of love of the practical side of things, maybe there's not that much of a difference. Maybe you just like that experimenting and playful side of things. So where did the more artistic side of things come into your career?
Well, as with science and physics, I've always loved the arts. I was very young when my father and mother told me to try to start writing poetry, and up to now, I still have a little spiral notebook where I scribbled in my rhymes when I was 9 or 10 years old. And you look at them now, and you think, oh my God! But then you think, oh, I was 9 or 10 at that time. I had a teacher named Marilyn Hamyas, and I rhymed it with a simple country lass and things like that, right? And didn't really make sense because she wasn't a simple country lass, but you had to kind of make the rhyme fit.
Sure.
And so that progressed all the way through high school, through university. In university, I was the youngest to ever win the Palanca Award, which is equivalent to the Pulitzer in my country, the Philippines.
Okay.
And so I was 18 or 19 when I won the English poetry prize, and that was very heady.
Yeah, I can imagine.
So that followed me all the way to Swansea. And in Swansea, I while I was doing physics in the lab, I was also writing poetry. And in fact, I was a runner-up in the British National Poet Competition that was sponsored by the BBC and the UK Poetry Society.
Mm-hmm.
So at the award ceremony, I got to meet some of the poets that were my idols at the time. The one who was most memorable was Wendy Cope.
Okay.
And her comment to me at that time was, when I read your poem and the poem was Hush, she thought, oh, gosh, it's just a simple thing about someone coming home from work or coming home from work and her husband massaging her feet and saying those three words that any woman loves to hear, which is, I'll cook tonight. And she said, this poem has become, it's just an amazing love poem. And I put it in my folder of favorites, and I've kept that with me all my life. Wendy Cope has one of my poems in her folder of favorites. It's like, it's an inspiration, right? And so Swansea, as you know as well, is not just not just the home of the university and Department of Physics. It's also home to a lot of culture. Dylan Thomas lived not a few blocks from where I live, and I used to pass by his house and touch that little black for luck sort of thing, right?
Yeah.
And after I'd won well, not won, but placed in the poetry competition, people would come up to me in pubs and ask me to recite poetry. That's, it's not unusual. This is Swansea.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Poets are celebrated. Choir singers are celebrated. It's not just, the scientific minds of the time. It's the artists, the poets. It's just brilliant. So at the time in Swansea, too, I remember going to various exhibits, not just in Swansea, but also in Cardiff, where it was my first exposure to artists like David Hockney, for example.
Okay.
And at the time, he was starting his Xerox copyworks, where he was playing with photocopiers. And and I thought, gosh, I should get one of those, right? And now, of course, 20, 30, 40 years later, I regret not getting one of those because I looked at it and it's like, ooh, £1,000. That's impossible, right? Well, what £1,000, right? I'll spend my entire, pocket money. And then now here I am now looking at it thinking, what? $500,000? Darn it. So yeah, and it's not just the monetary aspect. I loved David Hockney's works at the time. I appreciated them for the experimentation that he was doing in terms of a different medium of art. And as you said, you made an observation before that maybe it's not so different, the art and the science, because there's the experimentation aspect of it as well. So it's not been two separate careers, if you like. It's been careers that have been intertwined like a DNA helix throughout my life.
It sounds like Swansea was a formative period for you in all sorts of ways then. Areas of interest sort of intersecting.
That's right. It was a crucible for all of these things. It was everything everything came together in Swansea. You could very well make the argument that that's where it all came together.
So from there, your career took off in various directions. Um,
Oh yeah.
so maybe you could talk a little bit about like your day job and how you kind of split that, the different areas up.
Eventually, I ended up in Canada and started in the University of Toronto as a postdoctoral researcher, which is essentially saying that I was essentially a grad student with medical and dental benefits, right? It was great as well, and I continued to write as well. I placed and won in a couple of poetry competitions from the League of Canadian Poets, various poetry magazines, and then I embarked on essentially what became essentially a 25, 30-year career in the nuclear industry. The nuclear industry and the energy industry, but in Ontario, where I settled, the nuclear power makes up about 70% of our energy needs. So you need nuclear power, and I specialized in project management, and some of the projects that I did were essentially to send robots to a remote location, which is essentially the inside of a nuclear, the heart of the reactor, where there is very high heat, high radiation, high vibration, really terrible environment, and control that robot remotely from far away in order to gather data and send it back to us so that we can so we can infer things about the state of that distant place, which is very much, if you think about it, like controlling a lunar lander.
Yeah, definitely.
You send a robot up there, it takes a long time to send signals there and to get data back. And so a lot of those skills have come full circle, if you like. So 30 years or so in nuclear and power and energy, I got into a few startups, got on the board of directors of a couple of startups. At last count, when I looked at the number of startups I've actually founded, there's 7 of them.
Wow.
Only maybe one, which really was a home run, but it only takes one.
Yeah,
And
sure.
that home run was a company called Poet Technologies, believe it or not. And Poet there stands for Planar Optoelectronic Technologies. So if you like, it's the Planar Optoelectronic Technologies technology, but Poet Technology.
Yeah.
And people always ribbed me that we named it that way, and I twisted and turned to make it Poet Technologies because of my background in poetry, but that's not quite the case. But if you look at the optoelectronic side of it, although I was working in nuclear power, optoelectronics was essentially the kind of work that I was doing at Swansea as well. So there you go. Again, that thesis of, it all came together in Swansea. It does make some sort of sense. There was an immature poet scientist beforehand, came to Swansea. It all came together, and after that, it just blossomed. So that was a startup route. After that home run, I basically retired from the industry early. It enabled me to do my passion work, and my passion work was essentially, well, I sat on the board of directors of companies and helped them bring technology to their daily operations. Mining is a big thing in Canada, so we help bring big data analysis, AI, blockchain, all that sort of thing. I helped bring that into the mining industry, and meanwhile, I also scratched the artistic itch by writing poetry, by publishing books, all the way up to now.
So kind of following on from that, to expand the question a little bit, do you think you're a different sort of writer and curator and editor and all those things because of your career in the scientific side of things? Do you think you've been shaped by?
Definitely, it is very clear because every artist, whether they're a writer, poet, visual artist, director, musician, they speak with their own particular vocabulary, and it's their specific vocabulary that makes them unique. And my vocabulary comes from the world of science. if you look at my poetry and my writing, even my most romantic poetry has has its basis in the idiom of science. And then it was a very natural movement to go to science fiction and speculative fiction, simply because that type of that genre, if you like, was receptive to the way that I spoke. If I had spoken the other in mainstream literature, it wouldn't be as well accepted. Although I like to think that my science fiction actually is literature. I one of my great revelations was that I could continue to write poetry as short stories when I read the works of Margaret Atwood or Kazuo Ishiguro, and I thought, gosh, they're really using speculative fiction uh, uh, metaphors for what they want to say, and that informed me as well of how I would write. When I write science fiction isn't really about the future. It uses futuristic idioms to comment on society today. What I want to do is I want to highlight issues today by using the idiom of the future.
I think sometimes sci-fi gets put in a box. I think the very best sci-fi is doing those sorts of things. It's basically creating a sense of freedom to be able to explore things which we understand, but in more interesting ways, I guess.
I think so. I think so. One of the best movies I think of recent times in science fiction is Arrival. I'm
Yeah,
not sure
yeah,
if you've heard of it.
yeah.
It's about aliens that come by, and this linguist is brought in to try to understand their language, and not to try to spoil anything, but it's less a movie about meeting aliens than it is about communication, and not just communication with aliens, it's communication with herself and her daughter and the people around her. So it's an amazing film that way. You come away feeling moved and saying, well, that wasn't Star Wars, that was something else, right? And Star Wars is great, don't get me wrong, love it, but that's not the kind of stories that I want to tell. I want to tell stories like Arrival.
So I mentioned in my notes too, this is a reductive question, but I wonder, sometimes with science these days, there's like I don't know, almost a pessimistic way of looking at things, like technology's out to get us. There's going to be developments in AI and that's going to cause the end of the world and this and that. So I was wondering how you kind of fall on that spectrum in terms of how optimistic or pessimistic you are about the possibilities of technology.
I'm optimistic,
Hmm.
actually. The world looks like it's going the wrong way, and there are many things wrong with the world. You can't turn away from that. But I'm a believer that the human race has one great advantage over every other species, and that's its ability to use science to make life better. The question
Hmm.
is, are you going to use science to make life better, or you're going to use it not for and I believe that there are enough people with altruistic motives that it will work. Um, we're flooded with images of dystopia because dystopia sells. Whenever you have a when you have movies or TV shows, you always have to start out with a dystopia because the hero has to break through that and have a happy ending and whatever. It's very hard to put together a movie where it's utopian, right?
Hmm.
It doesn't look real because when you look around the real world, it isn't real. But there's a new genre of science fiction coming out now called solar punk, and is very different from the dystopian literature we've been so used to. And you'll see in coming years, it's going to grow. And essentially, it's it's speculative fiction with hope at
Hmm.
the center of it all, where it's not the big bad empire, but you're coming out of, if it's the other part of it, if you like, you're coming, that it's celebrating coming out of destruction and finding that new world. Whereas, the old movies, the old stories have the big bad empire and the rebels breaking through and winning in the end, but it never says what happens afterwards.
Yeah,
How
yeah.
do you build that utopia from the ruins of the empire?
Hmm.
And I think we're coming into that people now. How do you build a utopia out of the ruins of a world that's devastated by climate change, by species endangerment, by wars, by viruses? We have to rebuild, and that's solar pump.
Hmm. Yeah, and that's like the more imaginative way of looking at it, right? Because a dystopia is it's easy to imagine in many ways. You just sort of imagine the worst. I think it takes someone braver
You,
to push
yeah,
beyond that and think, how can we
that's right.
make things better?
It's easy to extrapolate from the world you see around you. You look around and you say, "Gosh, how much it could get worse," and here's
Yeah,
how
yeah,
it's going to get worse. But
yeah.
imagining how it could get better, now that's imagination.
Yeah, yeah, sure. Yeah, so it kind of leads us on to one of the main projects you've been working on recently, the Lunar Codex, which seems to me like an encapsulation of this optimistic, sort of forward thinking project. So would you be able to talk about that a little bit more?
Sure. Ever since I began working in literature, I found out that the best way, if you like, to make an impression on the world is to basically include others in your success.
Hmm.
And so it started with the Future Chronicles. Like I started the book series, the Future Chronicles. It started out to try to highlight my own stories because I started from poetry, went into short stories, didn't have the stamina to write a novel at that time. So I said, well, I'll make a collection of short stories, but I don't have 20 short stories. How do I do that? Oh, I'll ask other people to write these short stories. So if you like, I called myself at the time an accidental anthologist, and I put my stories in there and wrapped it around with several other writers. And then I had a great the aha idea, if you like, which was to ask stories from established writers, people who had won the Hugo and Nebula Awards, who'd hit the New York Times bestseller list. And I'll just ask, and if the worst that they could say is no. So I asked them, would you like to contribute a story to this? I'll pay you for it, and you get encourage all these young writers who now will have their names alongside the Hugo winning author, etc. And to my surprise, most of them said yes. I've got Ken Liu on board the Future Chronicles. Ken Liu is the translator of he's most well known for being the translator of the Three Body Problem, and his own works are now being optioned for film. One of the short stories that was featured in Future Chronicles went on to become part of Love, Death, and Robots on Netflix, and the list goes on, right? I can name so many people who basically said yes. They came on board, and gosh, that's the books took off like gangbusters. I have 20 to 25 of these anthologies now, and every single one of them were bestsellers. So that's how I began to share with authors. And my wife and I are also collectors. Started from early days. My mother is an artist, and my father is a playwright. That's part of how this started. And so, as I began collecting, I began to become known in the art circles, and I began to be asked to curate exhibits. Now I've curated probably half a dozen or so exhibits in Chicago, Florida. And again, the joy that you have when artists share in that, it was just amazing. Well, one day the pandemic hit, and we went on lockdown. And what happened in lockdown is all the artistic venues closed, theaters closed down, art halls and galleries closed down, and all the artists and writers that I knew were basically despondent. And at the same time, I knew that that NASA was embarking on a new project. It was Artemis, but there was a very little known program called the Commercial Lunar Payload Services Program, or CLPS. Nobody knew about this. Everyone Artemis, but I came upon CLPS because I was working with a logistics and transport startup. And that logistics and transport startup, I began reading magazines and research articles. And I came across this article that said that DHL DHL,
Yeah, yeah,
the package courier thing.
yeah.
They were going to start up this, we'll send your package to the moon sort of program. And I thought, well, this is very cool. And I didn't give that article to my mentee at the time because it didn't. But I chucked it away in my memory. And in fact, I decided, well, I'll send something of mine up there. So I took a little silver piece, engraved it, and put it and bought a moon box. And and I said, okay, that's what they call the DHL moon box. And I would and it'll go to the moons, right? This is great. And then I was part of a project that reminded me that, gosh, remember anthologies? Remember exhibits? When you share the joy, it's multiplied tenfold. So I said, well, gosh, and so I began sourcing payload, more moon boxes, more people with moon boxes, and placing not just my own poetry on it, but my anthologies as well. And when people said you're bringing us where to the moon, that's nuts.
Yeah.
And so the joy just multiplied and grew and grew. And you don't just send these books because, gosh, that's expensive, right? The price to send to the moon is crazy. Is crazy. So what we did was I began to look at technology in order to miniaturize this because you pay on the basis of weight. And someone said, "Wait, are we the first women artists on the moon?" And I thought, I have no idea. And I checked and I said, "Gosh, they all the ones that went up on Apollo and things like that, there were men." Well, golly, yeah, we are the first ones to bring women artists on board because we brought them on art without regard to gender or anything like that. But we now have the first disabled artist on the moon. I've got an artist who basically paints with her eyes, for example. I have artists with autism, and it's just amazing how the kind of art that you can find if you're blinded to anything else except the art, right? Then someone asked me, "Well, do you have anybody from Wales?" And I said, "I don't know. I have no idea, right? I just collect these artists. I don't look at their biographies. I don't know." And I started looking, and then I started taking down the countries and tracing down where everybody came from. And so it went from 100 countries to 150 countries, and and then I included indigenous nations in it as well.
Yeah, yeah.
So we're now up to 234 nations in all over the world. And that means it's just a global sort of thing. It becomes not just a representative of my own personal taste in art, because then I began to tap other anthologists around the world. I've got, for example, African poetry from anthologies in Africa, which cover the whole continent of Africa, right? I've got the Australian Beautiful Bizarre magazine, which Australia is a big contributor. I think we've got something like 35, 40 artists and writers from Britain. We've got maybe 5 from Wales, and that I know of because I haven't documented everything yet. I haven't traced everyone's biography.
It must be a lot of work just to catalog everything that you include in.
It's a huge amount of work, and yet that's the value in it, if you like, because some of these folks are the first people from their country to be able to participate in something like this. In I believe it was Bulgaria. I could be wrong, but one of the Slavic countries, their Ministry of Culture was the one that announced that our poet has been selected to be on a time capsule to go to the moon. There have been Romanian artists, for example, who have been given grants to do films because of their participation in the Lunar Codex. One of our Ukrainian artists was on the run during the war, and I managed to trace her because I loved her artwork. We eventually bought some of her artwork for our collection, and we said, "Can we use your art?" And she was in tears. She's been written up in the New York Times and elsewhere because she says, "Oh my God, at that time, she doesn't even know whether her culture will survive, whether her country will survive. And for us to preserve something of Ukrainian art for her was just unimaginable at the time. We have at least one poet from Swansea living and working in Swansea, and have at least one poet who actually went to the Department of Physics in Swansea as well. He's now working in Ireland.
Okay.
She was in my department in Swansea, and she wrote poetry as well.
Yeah.
So I remembered her all these years and said, you should contribute something. I said, but don't contribute it to me. We have an editor for this anthology, and if you get accepted, then you're good. And she submitted it. It was accepted. It was a poem that's in English and in Irish. It's fantastic, right? And so there's even Swansea has representation on the Lunar Codex.
Yeah, it's fantastic. And like from the outside, it's obviously really impressive because it's on the moon and it's art and it's all these different countries involved, and it's fun. That just sounds great. But then when you dig into the individual story, each one of those people has their own story, and it means so much to them. It's become it must be such a joyous thing to share.
One day I may sit down and write about this and write about all the life stories. The Lunar Codex as a mission in itself looks very good, but as you said, all these individual lives that basically have been impacted by the Codex, those stories are even more incredible. And that's one of the reasons I like talking about the Codex. I like talking about the school children in France who have the Codex they're learning English. So they're looking at the poetry on the Codex, and they're being asked by their teacher, how do you select poetry to go on the Codex? And all of these children wrote, they're not children, they're youths, they're high schoolers. Mm-hmm. They wrote me and said, and had questions like, how do you choose? How did you afford the Codex? Because one different thing about this project from any other project is no artists pay any fees.
Okay.
There are other projects out there where the artist pays a fee to get on board, and mm-hmm. they're on board. Mm-hmm. And that's a business model. That's valid. But in our case, you have to be curated in mm-hmm. by someone. Mm-hmm. And we sell no merchandise, so we make no money off of the artist anytime. And no one believed me at first when I said we're going to do this. And they thought this is some sort of scam, right? Yeah. Someday, you're going to. But no one has paid anything for this. We've shouldered it ourselves. We looked at our retirement money and we said, can we do this? Oh, it's our legacy. It'll be our legacy. Mm-hmm. And so we did this. And yeah, it's an amazing thing, and it becomes more and more amazing as you go on, because now we've inspired other groups mm-hmm. like who are basically not just looking at curated artists, but going to social impact groups and saying, give me your disadvantaged youth and women and others from Africa, from India, and let them send in a drawing or something, and we will send it to the moon for free. Mm-hmm. And they're doing this in concert with the Lunar Codex now. And people ask me, what are you going to do after? How do you top this? And I think to myself, I can't. I'm just one guy. But then you have organizations like this whose inspiration, were inspired to do this because we did it, mm-hmm. and we showed it can be done. You don't have to be a billionaire to do it.
Yeah. It's almost, so I think what it really shows is a testament to the spirit of collaboration. So you've decided to work collaboratively in terms of artists, and then it's just sort of widened. The ripples have gone further and further.
That is right. That's right. Yeah. I didn't know when to stop.
Yeah, it's fantastic, and it leads us on to something else. So the theme of the magazine, which this interview is going to be linked to, is culture. It got me thinking about how art still plays a role within our society, because I think we quite often, especially in the UK, I'm not sure what it's like elsewhere, but we prioritize like productivity, efficiency, making money and doing things for some sort of value rather than just joy and the spirit of creativity. So I guess I just wanted to ask you, with your unique experience in both camps in terms of science and art, where you think art like has a role to play in this world, why it's so important that we continue to be creative for the sake of being creative.
I think it's important because if you take all of the work that we do to enhance productivity, to manufacture things, to fight for freedoms, et cetera, the question becomes, then what's the point of it?
Mm-hmm.
Why are you doing this? What's the point of raising productivity? What is the point? And the point is art in all its forms. It's to celebrate the human spirit, because art is, if you like, the essence of what makes us human. And all this striving, all this working, is so that we can sit back and enjoy watching Arrival. And you know, and when we turn on Netflix, it's not just to tune it out. That is the point. The point is to enjoy art, whether you're enjoying it in a movie, or you kick off so that the weekend you go to the museum,
Mm-hmm.
you know, to listen to a band. That is the point. You do your 5 days of productivity so that you can take the weekend and enjoy art, whatever your art may be.